as an alternative, Ron Gibson maintains this amazing channel on YouTube where he archives programs from a wide variety of broadcasters, including this one. And so we posted a link to that channel on my website. And also in the right-hand margin, underneath where it says most recent podcast, there's now a little notice. If the RBN podcast is not working, click the link to Ron Gibson's archives. Those are up to date. And YouTube is a very reliable server, so you can hear the programs that way. All right, getting into the news here. The situation with this false flag in Orlando, this thing is falling apart faster than the F-35. And I have completely worn out my egg timer. I need to buy a new one of those things. And probably the biggest bombshell to come on out is that this shooter's former wife came on out and said, Omar Mateen is gay, or was gay. And it's being confirmed by a lot of sources. And here's the interesting thing, because in the New York Post article that ran this story, the ex-wife said the FBI told her not to mention the fact that he was gay to the American media. So she didn't. She mentioned it in the Brazilian media, and it was picked up and went around the globe from there. Because after all, never let the actual facts get in the way of a good propaganda story, because, I mean, Obama's up there on Fox News right now, terror, 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 ISIS, ISIS, ISIS. And what we have is the shooting is carried out by a gay registered Democrat with links to the U.S. security system. And it's, apparently he was a regular at this Pulse nightclub. And some of the people who knew him are saying that he had to be escorted from the premises drunk on numerous occasions, which tells us Omar Mateen was not a devout Muslim, because devout Muslims do not consume alcohol. This guy was raised in America. For all intents and purposes, he's an American. He's a gay registered Democrat, and the FBI was trying to cover that up. But we're seeing more and more of these stories again in the foreign media. The Daily Mail was talking about, how he was pursuing relationships with male classmates, was a regular at many gay bars, including Pulse, and had profiles at apps for hooking up with other men, like Grindr. And that's a real problem for the people behind this false flag, because a gay registered Democrat just can't be made to fit any of the agendas that are out there. Apparently, a rather famous drag queen is saying that Omar Mateen was his friend as well. Now, we are getting confirmation that at least two of the associates of Omar Mateen were undercover FBI informants. Remember, the FBI investigated this guy. They cleared him. Remember, when this story first broke, the news was saying there's nothing on this guy's background. He's no prior criminal record. He wasn't on the terror watch list. And then to push that terror agenda, oh, yes, he was on our radar. We failed. We should have known. Yeah, you should have. If you believe the official story, this represents an epic failure of the entire United States government. Compared to its other epic failures, it's about average. Now, interestingly enough, the company Omar Mateen worked for, G4S, global security company, does a lot of dirty work for governments. Judicial Watch caught them helping to smuggle illegal immigrants from the Mexican border up into the interior of the United States with no paper trail whatsoever. G4S ran 2 background checks on Omar Mateen. They found nothing. This guy was a patsy. He was set up. Somebody said, we need a convenient Muslim to kill and leave at the site of the New Gleiwitz incident so we can scream evil Muslim terrorists and get the war going again. They rushed this one. They cowboyed it, and they're paying the price. It's all falling apart. Now, the chief of police in Orlando is now admitting that many, if not most, of the actual victims from that club were probably shot by the police. If you look at the video of that final assault, it looks like that closing scene from the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And here's where it gets really weird. Apparently SWAT was told to wait for 3 hours after the first shots were fired, and everybody's saying, what the heck was that all about? Who gave the order for the SWAT team to basically do nothing for 3 hours? So this is getting, more and more out there. Remember I said, based on what happened at the Empire State Building shootout, it was entirely possible that many of the killed and wounded were killed by the police. But when you're killed by the police, it's for peace and justice and mom and apple pie in the American way and truth and justice. When you're shot by the bad guy, then it's a sacrifice to the terrorist and blah, blah, blah. Another audio tape has surfaced confirming there were at least 2, possibly more guns firing simultaneously when the shooting began. There were multiple shooters. It was reported by eyewitnesses. We now have the audio tape. This guy was a patsy. He was set up. He just doesn't fit the profile of somebody who's going to do it. He knew the people who went to that club. They were his friends, some of them possibly his lovers. It doesn't make any sense. Now, there's an article that's coming out from the Political Insider reminding us all that while serving in the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton worked closely with President Obama to defend Islamists from critics, and now it's being perceived by those who believe the official story as having backfired horribly. They're really in a corner on this one. This is complete disaster. It's like Obamacare. The overt story is making them look bad. The covert reality is making them look bad. This was a true U.S. government flustercluck out there. And they're pushing it for all the various agendas. Everybody's all over the place with this. Little flashback. Remember, Dianne Feinstein says her goal is to disarm all Americans. And Barack Obama has now come out, and I am not kidding you. He is out there trying to sell us the idea that the best way to defeat terrorism is to disarm all the law-abiding American citizens. He's actually out there trying to sell that as a train of thought we should all go along with. Yes, if we disarm all the law-abiding citizens, the terrorists will be defeated. Well, let us remember that Pulse nightclub was a gun-free zone. Now, there was supposedly an armed guard on the premises, but apparently he was one of the very first people shot. Somebody knew that he was an armed security guard, and they took him down. But that's how they're trying to spin this. That by disarming the law-abiding American citizens, this will somehow make the terrorists go away. No, actually it's going to make, any nut who still has a gun, whose brain is melted on prescription psychiatric medications, say, I can go anywhere. I can shoot anybody, and nobody can defend themselves. Now, when Obama talks about defeating terror, what he's really talking about is nothing is terrifying Washington, D.C. more right now than an American people able to say no when the government demands your silver, your gold, and your children for more and more wars of conquest. And Obama's out there saying, how many more people are we going to have to kill? I mean, how many more people are going to have to die before you give us your guns? I know how to stop terror. I know how to stop ISIS. You stop terror by stop mucking about with other people's countries. You stop ISIS by putting a stop payment on those checks. Remember, one of the revelations that has come out of the Judicial Watch lawsuit on Hillary's email server is the fact that the U.S. government created and supported and funded Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It's right out of George Orwell's 1984. The government makes the enemy you're supposed to be afraid of. And the gun grabbers are out there like crazy. The New York Times had an editorial calling for Congress to secretly suspend Second Amendment rights, ignoring the fact Congress can't do that. The only way they're going to be able to suspend the Second Amendment is with a new amendment, passed by both houses of Congress, signed by the President, and ratified by 3/4 of the states. They're not going to get that. But the New York Times is out there saying, to heck with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. We think that the government should have the right to arbitrarily say that this person cannot have guns. And the fallacy of that whole position is that this Omar Mateen passed a full background check to buy his guns. The system doesn't work. It's a complete failure. That's if you buy the official story. The rest of us know better. We're going to take a phone call. Bernard in Vancouver. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm just following what you're saying. It's always interesting to see you correctly foretold what would happen when some false flag thing would happen and the impact it would have regarding Trump's statement announcement about the Clintons. Now, there was another example. I'm going to come back to it about the Hebdo thing in Paris. I'd like to know how many people remember what was the huge story on that level that disappeared at that particular time. But I wanted to throw in the Greenpeace. When Greenpeace started in Vancouver, they were a bunch of media-savvy people, and they pulled off some pretty amazing stunts, but they called it a mind bomb. They would do something so dramatic and so original, like sailing into a place where they're going to test the nuclear bomb, the French and the Americans, that everybody would talk about it, and it would totally kind of take a part of everybody's consciousness. Now, it seems like this has been taken to very dark corners in doing this just over and over again, It just seems so blatant, and they just got all of us talking about it. But I just wanted to mention what you had already stated, that the crimes of the Clintons, they can't hold it off forever. But what has happened? It's been delayed, I think, at this point.
Yeah, Trump has announced that he was not going to do the speech while this whole Orlando thing was dominating the media. He's going to wait for things to quiet down. And so I'm sure that the Clintons are already figuring out what else can we do? What else can we do to distract the media? He's going to make that speech, in a couple of weeks. We got to come up with something else. Let's crash some planes into a building or something. They're panicking. They're feeling the ground shrinking underneath their feet right now.
Yeah. Well, I think when women of America find out about how she's affected other women that were complaining about her husband's sexual aggression and worse, as to who their friends are. And I think that politically that'll be the end of her.
Well, it's definitely one of her political weaknesses. I mean, she's out there screaming she's an advocate for women. She was not too long ago saying that any woman has a right to be heard and believed about sexual assault, except, of course, for that white trailer trash scum those sluts who are trying to impugn her husband and everything. And, of course, Hillary's taking money from all these countries that do abuse women societally and systematically, and she won't say anything bad about that. And so, I would hope, that women are smart enough to see through this obvious pandering.
Well, anyway, I found it's been life-transforming tuning into this network. I was already listening to yours, but Dr. Bill and John after. It's just a whole different intellectual universe, especially for us starved Canadians from some real news.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. You got anything else?
No, that's great. I have the privilege to listen to you at work, but today we got rained out, so I can listen at home.
Oh, okay, yeah. Good. Well, now that we've got a workaround for the podcast, more and more people can tune on in here. All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And, again, everybody's trying to exploit Orlando for their particular agenda, and the gun grabbers are out there talking about this is why we have to ban AR-15s. We have to ban AR-15s. Look at the damage that the guy did with an AR-15. Actually, as it turns out, there was no AR-15 in that club. It's a fiction by the corporate media. Along with the claim that this is the worst shooting in the history of the United States. No, actually, Wounded Knee was worse. They're just making this stuff up. They're absolutely scared blind that the American people are waking up to the reality of what our society is, and they are desperate to find some way to disarm us. And let's face it, Obama's current claim that we're going to stop global terrorism by disarming the law-abiding American citizen, it's absurd on the face of it. I have to admire his ability to keep a straight face while he says that. Now, getting on back to G4S, the company that Omar Mateen, who appears to have been a patsy that was set up for this thing. G4S apparently is a client and associate of another company called Crisis Cast. And looking at the name, I'll bet you can guess what they do. They provide actors and filmmakers specially trained in disaster and crisis management. That's their business, faking these things here. And a couple of very embarrassing videos have now surfaced, and we have them linked to whatreallyhappened.com until YouTube pulls them down, which I'm expecting any minute. One of them is some of the news coverage, and there's a news commentator on the left, and on the right they're showing these people carrying a shooting survivor down the street. And they go down the street, and at the moment when they think the news camera has stopped taking their pictures, they put the wounded guy down and stand around just laughing. Yesterday we were pointing out that video from one of the police press conferences where the guy in the back was smiling and laughing. And here's where it gets really, really good, and you need to look at this. Again, these crisis actors carrying a pretend victim down the street, and it's just horrible image there, and somebody took a look at the buildings in the background. The MRI Center, the Dunkin' Donuts, a couple of others, went to the Google Street View of the area and discovered these people were actually carrying the supposed victim toward the Pulse, not away. Now, the ambulances were a couple of blocks away. There were no ambulances actually at the Pulse. So whoever set up this little staged video wasn't paying attention. They've actually got this guy being carried back toward the Pulse at a time when supposedly, Omar Mateen is still inside shooting at people. It's complete fakery from beginning to end. It's falling apart. And the government shills are already over. Oh, no, they put him down because he had a stone in his shoe. That's it. And yes, these people were going toward the Pulse, but they got turned around. They were confused. They thought the first responders were there. Really, this is completely innocent, and you shouldn't read anything into it at all. You can smell the panic. Absolute panic. Now, there's another article coming on out from Activist Post talking about how Omar Mateen appeared to have ties to the FBI. There have been a couple of these articles, one of which is suggesting he went through a legal name change back in 2006. And they're saying it's because he's actually been an undercover FBI informant for a lot of years and was caught in one of these entrapment cases where the FBI finds some patsy, sets him up so they can make a newsworthy arrest. And if that's true, talk about hoisting on your own petard, where he's all of a sudden on the receiving end of that. So, all right, we're going to take, we're going to hold the phone call off because we're coming up on a commercial break here. Other people are saying, what are we being distracted from? Investment Watch blog is saying there's a lot going on with China and Russia, and the corporate media isn't reporting on that. The corporate media certainly is not reporting on the massive election fraud that's starting to surface out in California. They're just out there doing their paid job. Terror, 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 terror. You must want war. You must want to give us your money and the lives of your children to send off into combat. That's what you should want. And you can just smell the panic coming from the network boardrooms and inside the Beltway over there in Sodom on the Potomac. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the head of the UN is calling for a U.S. gun ban because of Orlando. Everybody's trying to exploit this. The FBI is supposedly examining the Orlando shooter's electronic devices, probably deleting all the numbers of all the informants and everything that he was working with here. But everybody is pounding on this. Amazingly enough, lawyers for the ACLU issued a statement blaming Christians for what happened at the gay bar in Orlando because of Christians' intolerance for the gays, and it only fueled this, fanatical Muslim, which we know Omar Mateen was not a devout Muslim because he drank. It's not there. Yet another agenda being put on out there is saying, well, this Orlando massacre happened, after U.S. lawmakers filed more than 200 anti-LGBT bills, so it's really all the government's fault, which I agree with, but not exactly in the same context. And there's a reality out there for people that are going to have to deal with. For those who believe the official story, this represents yet another in a long line of epic failures. And even the Mises Institute is out there saying the FBI and NSA won't keep us safe. They can't. All the spying and all the informants and all the rest of it still went right on through. The FBI has been so busy with their little entrapment stings. You know, it's too hard to actually go on out and find real terrorists. You know, our job is to produce headline-grabbing arrests. So we're going to find all these losers and talk them into doing something. And at Zero Hedge, they have a story about this, saying that the FBI routinely goes on out and they find vulnerable people, people who need money, people suffering from mental illness, people on prescription antidepressants. They're susceptible to bribery because of the hard economic times, to the point where they're willing to help put their own friends behind bars who have not actually committed a real crime. One of the most interesting stories was this FBI informant found this homeless panhandler, took him to a store, sent him in to buy things that could be used to make an improvised explosive device, gave him the money to do it, then they arrested him. I mean, that's what the FBI has really been doing. It's all fakery and fraud. Go back and read the history of COINTELPRO. If you want to know what the FBI is really like, don't bother watching Hollywood films. The FBI has, going all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover, always made sure that Hollywood will portray the FBI in a positive light. There's a classic movie, The FBI Story, starring Jimmy Stewart. And what most people don't know is J. Edgar Hoover was on that set every day telling the director how to portray the FBI agents. Hoover actually appears briefly in the film, but only from the back. Now, there's been another shooting incident down in Amarillo, Texas, at a Walmart. And I'm sure they got a phone call from the White House saying, please make sure the patsy isn't a gay Democrat this time. You're making us look silly. And apparently police have shot that perpetrator. So if it was going to be a distraction from the crumbling Orlando story, I mean, they're getting really desperate for distraction. Apparently there's a huge fire at a construction yard near Disney World now. Trying to pull attention off this, change the focus, change the story. Remember the bombing in Beirut, the Marine barracks, and then 24 hours later the U.S. invades Grenada? Change the focus, lure the media away. Now, earlier this morning at the CGI America Symposium, former President Bill Clinton was asked twice about conflicts of interest. And he was asked point blank, what's going to happen to the Clinton Foundation if Hillary's elected? And he dodged the questions. Well, we know what's going to happen to the foundation. Absolutely nothing. Because the Clintons dodged the presidential blind trust during Bill's term in office. That was the motive behind the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, who did not want to sign those fraudulent documents and risk jail time and preferred to resign. Now, U.S. District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan, earlier today, he's basically hearing the Judicial Watch case, is saying, yes, this is a criminal case. The FBI is conducting a criminal investigation. It's not a background security check like Hillary insisted. We'll be right back with more about the email servers. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Fox News was just running this story that intelligence agencies have found an ISIS kill list. ISIS is planning to kill thousands of Americans, and they picked out specific targets, which means when they start assassinating bloggers and independent media talk show hosts, they're going to claim it was all done by ISIS. I mean, it's nonsense. And by the way, stocks in gun companies have soared. It's the only part of the market that did really well today. Let's grab a couple of phone calls. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Remember my statement yesterday when I connected all the dots and accused the FBI of running this false flag operation in Orlando?
I do remember that. Don't you hate being right all the time?
Well, I think the fact that James Comey came out later and denied involvement is very interesting.
Well, you know, there's an old wisdom in Washington, D.C., never believe anything until it's officially denied.
Well, the other thing I noticed, that why have they pulled this operation now? Is it to cover the fact that of Hillary Clinton's criminality? Is it to cover the fact that this situation in the South China Sea is escalating? Or, what I think is more important, is their operations in Syria and Iraq are collapsing rapidly. And what we're talking about now is lots of people are saying, what is going to happen after the Syrian war is over, this proxy war by America on Syria? What's going to happen after? And we're hearing about these Takfiris now, the ISIS and Daesh and al-Nusra, moving out and actually making overtures into Turkey to find out if they can actually go back in there safely from Syria back into Turkey.
Well, the main road has already been cut off here. And again, it is a fallacy to think that anything that happens for just one reason. Remember, there are overlapping agendas, and if all of them say right now we all need a distraction, that's when the distraction is going to happen. Certainly the gun grabbers needed this right now. The Clintons needed this right now because of Trump's plan to start talking about all the Clinton crimes and make them current events. Certainly the U.S. needs this again to distract from what's going on in the Pacific and Russia and Crimea, and the fact that more and more European troops are pouring into Syria. They need a distraction from the fact that John Kerry is now down there in Venezuela trying to kick out their president and bring Venezuela under U.S. puppet control. They've been trying to do that since the days of Hugo Chavez. And, of course, they need a distraction from the coming Brexit, because nobody wants anybody looking at the poll numbers, which are swinging heavily toward Leave, because they're planning on trying to steal that election as well. And also, again, back to the Clintons, they need a distraction because of what's coming out of California and the indications that Hillary literally tried to reverse a landslide for Bernie Sanders, and it looks like she got caught. And there's a court case going forward to force a recount, and there's really no legitimate reason why it should not happen. At the very least, they ought to be counting all those provisional ballots, because there are more uncounted ballots than votes for Hillary. And so, obviously, the provisional ballots have the potential for changing the outcome, and under that situation, they are required by law to be counted.
I think this whole situation shows how messed up the policies coming down from Washington, D.C. and from the FBI and CIA headquarters. It's ridiculous.
I think everybody's thinking in terms of timescales of a week or maybe two. Nobody's really thinking long-term anymore. It's getting shorter and shorter and more knee-jerk. I think this whole thing in Orlando was cowboyed. It was put together very, very quickly. They've made so many stupid mistakes on this, even worse than they did with Boston, especially as these videos come on out showing what are very obviously staged shots for the media. And again, if you study the history of the last days of the Soviet Union, you'll see a lot of parallels where the Soviet people, because of the samizdat, all of a sudden learned the extent to which their government was lying to them. And as the government's credibility collapsed, they just came out with more and more extreme things, trying to find something that would get the people back on their side, and it's not really working. And I'm very, very concerned we could see a major event like a nuclear weapon to try and rally Americans against whoever we're supposed to be fighting against. Hillary even said it in that video yesterday about Iran, about how great it would be to have somebody attack us to unify the nation behind Washington, D.C.
Well, I think looking at this particular instances, it's not working. The people, if you read the blogs on various news outlets, it's just not working.
No, it isn't. And the reason they're going to fail is because most of the people still running this propaganda and policy are still working as if it was still the 1950s and 1960s, where the government would tell the media what to say, the media would say it, and nobody had a counter-argument. In the age of the Internet, that system does not work any longer. And credibility and trust in the government and the corporate media is at all-time record lows, and they don't know what to do about it. They can feel their grip on power slipping.
Just to inform your listeners, Michael, yes, we used to have a radio show called Freedom Fighters for All of Us. Only the guy who ran the server and what have you died in February. A guy called Matthew Green. Yeah,
I had gotten a few emails asking about your show here, so thank you very much for clearing that up. And hopefully there'll be somebody else who'll give you another opportunity in the independent media, because we need more voices. We need more voices speaking out about what's going on.
Okay, Michael, well, that's all I have for you today, and thank you for having me on again.
Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Matt in Colorado. Aloha, Matt. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael. How's it going?
Well, it's a crazy time, isn't it? I mean,
it is. And, most of the things that John from Barbados just discussed were the points that I wanted to address. I think one of the most important ones that might have slipped under the radar is that headlines were saying that the Internet is the source for domestic terrorism.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's
Yeah, they're trying to find some way they can shut it down. But again, going back to the historical precedent of Gutenberg and his rediscovery of movable type printing and making books affordable to the middle class, the power elite of that day tried to find some way to shut it down, get it under control, and they failed miserably. And what's going to happen is those institutions that are able to evolve and adapt to the new reality of a better informed, skeptical populace will survive, and those entities and institutions who can't make that change, they're doomed to go extinct. And unfortunately, the U.S. government is carrying the accumulated burden of 200 years of lies, fraud, and deception. And so they're kind of stuck.
Yeah, well, they kind of need to have a moment of reckoning and just lay it out on the table. And, with this, obviously Hillary is stealing the election, Second Amendment, all of that stuff. I was particularly surprised that Elizabeth Warren got behind Hillary and went on the TV show with Rachel Maddow
and out there bashing on Trump. Well, Elizabeth Warren is apparently under consideration to be Hillary's vice presidential running mate. So, of course, Elizabeth, is going to do what is in Elizabeth Warren's own best interest, which is to get on Hillary's team, follow Hillary's agenda, and attack Donald Trump. And that's basically what politicians tend to do. She may be in for a disappointment, because we're hearing that all of a sudden, despite the earlier denial that a deal was made, Bernie Sanders is meeting with the Democratic leadership and with Hillary Clinton. And so I still think the game is to make Bernie Sanders Hillary Clinton's vice president in order to prevent his supporters from deserting and voting for Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, I think that there would be no way that, I've never met Bernie Sanders, but I would think that there would be no way that he would ever do that. And, if Bernie Sanders was the vice president for Hillary Clinton,
yep,
it would just disenfranchise every single Bernie Sanders supporter that I know.
I think it I think it probably would, and we'll see. If Hillary and the Democrats make an attractive enough deal, everybody's got a price. Even I have a price. It's got a lot of zeros in it. So far, I've only been offered $1.50 to shut up. So obviously, that's not going to work. Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Alex in Florida. Alex, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Let's give credit to Bernie Sanders for all this stuff coming to a head. I think he deserves a lot of credit. And I also would not be surprised if Bernie doesn't win the nomination for president for the Democratic Party.
Well, again, if this situation in California, pans out, there's a lawsuit to force a full counting of all those provisional ballots, and everybody's looking at the numbers. Remember, they canceled the exit polls. They did not want those exit polls out there challenging the revealed dogma that Empress Hillary had won California. and nobody is believing that in California. And if they are forced legally to count all those ballots, the best estimates right now is that Bernie Sanders actually won California 69-31. And you've got all those young people who were supporting Bernie Sanders. Their voter registrations either vanished or changed to GOP without their permission and knowledge. And the poll workers are saying their electronic voting machines were showing 2-1 for Bernie Sanders, and yet somehow those numbers changed when they got to the Central Tabulation Center. So, I mean, there is absolutely no question Hillary Clinton stole California, and the issue is, somebody needs to get those provisional ballots and get them counted. And find out what, and because if Bernie Sanders won California, then Hillary Clinton is not anywhere near the nomination, and she could still come down with all that's going on.
And Michael, I just wanted to say, and I think the people in power probably know this, there's a book called The Fourth Turning that tells about how our country has revolutions every 80 to 100 years.
Yes.
And the time is up, and I'll tell you what, they should not be playing with the youth the way they potentially could play with them. I mean, I think it could really turn into something.
Well, it might be, Thomas Jefferson used to say, a little revolution every once in a while is a good thing. I'd like to see a peaceful revolution. I don't want to see a bloody revolution. I'm trying to find a way to avoid that. At this point, though, that is now out of my control, and there's not a thing I can do about that.
Well, I want peaceful revolution, and that's what Bernie Sanders' campaign is basically on. A peaceful revolution.
I agree.
It has to happen, or we're all going to be enslaved.
Well, I mean, that same thing can be said for Donald Trump. He's trying to bring about a peaceful revolution. He's trying to pull us off this path to endless war and the Project for the New American Century, or whatever they're calling themselves this month. And but again, we go back to what John F. Kennedy used to say: those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. I certainly hope that we don't have to prove John F. Kennedy is right. But clearly the U.S. government is willing to go all the way to the graveyard with this, or they wouldn't be so desperate to take our guns away.
You got that right. And I just want to say I thought that Donald Trump's speech last night for the terrorist act in Orlando was quite boring, I hate to say.
Well,
really,
again...
He was reading.
Yeah, it could very well be there. Anyway, listen, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Steve in Massachusetts before the commercial break. Steve, what's on your mind today?
Just a quick note that Elizabeth Warren was here in Massachusetts. I think it was yesterday, and they had all these protesters from the Bernie who voted for Bernie, how showing their disgust for Elizabeth Warren, how they felt like she betrayed them.
Yeah, well, I can see how they would feel that. I've had a lot of people send me emails saying that they thought Elizabeth Warren was genuine and concerned with the common people, and, first opportunity, she throws her lot in with Hillary Clinton. Birds of a feather flock together, and given that Elizabeth Warren is a career politician, you shouldn't be surprised.
Right. The reason why I called is, now I know all the actions that the United States has been partaking in and all the wars, it just leaves me disgusted. And I know they're tinkering on the edge of getting a war with Russia.
Yes.
And my question to you is, do we even want the United States to win this war? I mean, the United States seems to be the bad guy. And
yeah, we are the bad guy. There's no question we're the aggressor, we're the bad guy. And my concern isn't whether we should want the U.S. to win the war or not, but whether we can. And I don't think we can. When you look at the poor quality weapons that the U.S. military-industrial complex is producing, very expensive, very bloated, very poor quality, very ineffective, versus what's coming out of Russia and China right now. Plus, the U.S., after, 13, 14 years of invading some 17 countries, all of our stockpiles are drawn down. We're running out of supplies, and all those tanks and motorized vehicles and everything, they're not designed to last for a long time. They wear out very quickly, especially in those desert environments.
Yeah, I love my country, but I hate the actions of the government, and it's, I'm just disgusted with everything. I'm at a point where I'm not going to support anything they do anymore, and something needs to be done. It's getting so ugly.
Yeah, well,
it's getting to the point where we need to do something.
Well, we the people just stop listening to them. We stop trusting them. We stop believing them. We stop filling out paper forms that are thrown in us with wild, reckless abandon. We refuse to pay their bills, and we refuse to sacrifice the life of our children in their wars. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. I would never, ever send my son to war, not if I could help it.
Or your daughter. According to Phyllis Schlafly, the plan to draft young girls into combat is now back on the table in Congress.
Yeah, it's funny how the timing of that all of a sudden occurred. Nothing's a coincidence in my book.
Right now, the United States is the only modern nation that is planning to put women into combat. Not even Israel does that anymore.
Yeah, and that just goes to show how ugly it really is.
It really is a very ugly situation.
No holds barred. I mean, anything goes with them, and they're just desperate.
Yeah, they're desperate. They're going to try and double the size of the infantry by putting young women in there, and clearly, to me, it shows they're not even thinking about the aftermath of the war. They don't care. It's, victory or death. Other people's death. My victory, your death. That's how these things work.
Right, exactly. Well,
all right.
It's not your children.
Yeah, Steve, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Going to hit a few news stories before we get back to the phone calls here. So we now have the judge in the Judicial Watch lawsuit confirming the FBI investigation of Hillary Clinton is a criminal investigation. It is not, as Hillary tried to claim, a routine security check. And now even the White House has been forced to admit, yes, Hillary Clinton is under a criminal investigation by the FBI. Now here is where it gets really, really interesting. We've been talking about Hillary's constant claim. Hillary's supporters are always out there, okay, the server was weak, but nobody got into it. Nobody, broke in and so on. How could you know that? How could you know that? They can't. They're trying to declare a negative, and they can't support that claim. Well, we know Guccifer said that he got in there, and he saw at least 10 other foreign IPs inside Hillary Clinton's email server. Now we're hearing a story where Russian intelligence is getting to release a bunch of Clinton's emails they got from her server, probably through WikiLeaks. We were wondering where WikiLeaks is getting all of the emails they're putting on out there. And that means, yes, her server was broken into. She put U.S. secrets into a vulnerable place for foreign interception. That's a violation of U.S. law. It's a felony violation, Title 18. And I imagine Hillary Clinton right now is very furious. Those darned Russians, they copied secrets off my private server and they didn't pay for them? That means war. Now, the other day, there was a story that came out where the Saudi crown prince made a statement that Saudi Arabia had financed 20% of Hillary Clinton's campaign. The story was then yanked, and the Podesta group is now involved saying it was a hack. Somebody hacked into the news site and planted the story. That's all it is. There's nothing there whatsoever, except the Saudi crown prince is in Washington, D.C. for meetings, and all of a sudden, the meetings have been canceled. This is payback for this little faux pas, which tells us he really did say it. So he's come all this way to Washington, D.C., and they're just going to let him sit in the lobby. All righty, let's grab a phone call before the top of the hour station break. Joel in Washington, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I know I'm a little off topic, but I just wanted to let you know that yesterday we had snow here in north central Washington, and today we had snow. This morning when I woke up it was 37, and I actually had to start a wood fire, because we burn wood here to heat our house, and today we had to start a fire to keep the house warm.
Well, yeah,
global warming is just doing
that
a number
gosh
on
darn human-caused global warming here, and I was looking at the projection. They're saying the snow level is starting to drop in the Cascades.
It is, and here, we have a small little mountain just a little bit away from us, and can see the snow level coming down on Buckhorn, and it's quite amazing to. Normally, at this time of year, we're not supposed to have any kind of frost.
Yeah, I used to live in Washington State, and I'm familiar with it. I'm sorry to cut you off. We got to do a station ID, but thank you for the update from Washington State. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after these few words.